Yeah. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the final reading of our 23rd Annual National Poetry Month reading series. This afternoon, we have two great poets, Alexus Erin and Shaun Griffin. We are also joined by a special host to close out this year's readings. Please join me in welcoming the publisher and executive editor of Baobab Press and the owner of Sundance Books and Music, Christine Kelly.
Helps if you unmute. Thank you, Emily, very much. And it's just a real honor to be here today. Emily has just done a fantastic job all month, as she has done many months with all of our events and our virtual events. And we are so honored and grateful for her being part of our team. And it's also an honor to be able to have this opportunity to wrap up this month with two very fine poets. One new to us that we've had the great pleasure to work with, and certainly Shaun Griffin, who I could spend way too much of our time talking about. But I'll try a little later on. But I'm going to start with and introduce Alexus Erin, who is at the moment hailing from the UK. She is an American poet, performer, PhD candidate, living, as I said, in the UK. Her poetry has previously appeared in Potluck Magazine, Melanin Collective, Nervous Breakdown, The Audacity, American Society of Young Poets, God is the TV, Leveler, Red Flag Poetry, Silk and Smoke, and a host of others. She is the author of Cartoon Logic, Cartoon Violence, which just came out this month. And Baobab Press has the great honor to be her publisher. And two chapbooks, Two Birds, All Moon by Gap Riot Press in 2019, and St. John's Wort, Animal Heart Press, also in 2019. Among her many talents, Alexus is the 2018 Poetry Fellow of the Bardi Writers Conference. She is a performance artist, Edinburgh Fringe Festival, certified doula, and an emo enthusiast. She's also an incredibly kind, wonderful human being, and we have the great honor to work with her, and it's a pleasure to introduce Alexus Erin.
Thanks so much, Christine, and thank you to Emily and Shaun. It's lovely to meet you, and it's great to see you here, and I'm really excited to be here. So I guess I'll start. I'll be reading from my collection, which, as Christine mentioned, was just published. It's called Cartoon Logic, Cartoon Violence, and the first poem I will read is called After My 54th Reading of Michael Dickman's We Did Not Make Ourselves. Learn the law, dance the prayer. I am slowly making space for this kind of gratitude. I am seated in the back of the church, on the couch with the nursing mothers. Good News writes the check, love its tenants as the measured sovereign, creating parts that travel freely. It is more like being converted and being to convert than creation as the soul dizzied hope for tapered suffering. That is, more Brady Bunch than Mudville 9. It is divine, I think. It probably happens in pieces. Some days I remember what my father used to tell me walking ahead on bounding legs toward the corner of Hampton and Village Road West as I sketched the floor plan of a treehouse, checked bow strength with the weight of as much of this body as I could stand to suspend. It is more fitting now, after years have passed, to hear it aloud again, with brief start for the wiser. Away in the courtyard, I at times imagine myself married or buried or asleep in tall grass, or bracing for the end of any conceivable world. I feel great. Thanks for asking. A bigger plan is starting to make sense, at least in theory. I am reminded how moldable we are against the larger themes. Clock-bound, with an alarm set, easily moved by the kind eye whose corner crinkles, a pack of loose tobacco tucked between left sock and ankle, offered without direct request. I am starting to understand wanting an army like that to turn the tide, as surely we know there is a tide to turn. The next poem I'm going to read is called "And When He Speaks, He Reminds Me to Eat." In a sad hollow when I forget, and the big fuzz threatens to consume all a gossamer good, dissolving light a corneal burn, and I petition the empty room, can a bitch write about a grief parade? When I find there is only an echo of years intending to eat more than their share, to serenade me with a particularly aggressive rendition of Carmina Burana, like it's my birthday at a restaurant and I don't know where to look. Prayer, pushing, redraws the line, pairs the stitch in red. Canton needle embellishing the great tapestry, its canvas stretched under one of a handful of moons, our moon shared in bread and pasta shapes, moon metaphor, manna, wheat, oil, salt, heat, weight, to bloom and proof, to soften in hotter water. The third poem I'm going to read is called On Being Graceful. I have been pretty, and in my grief gentle, and in my hope loving. I have never forgotten your birthday. In the quiet dark I was promised, I still heard crying. I have been back flat and in my breath focused, and in my grasp tender, my reach a corral, waiting for the next great answer to my freedom bid, teaching my hands the medicine, making care of it, tend the earth for good seed, weave a trellis, cradle a soft man's face. I have been for so long in the poem kindly, me and my cleanly, my meticulous wound up like a music box dancer, encircling myself like a shark. The fourth poem I will read is Cartoon Violence, of the titular Cartoon Violence, Cartoon Logic, Cartoon Violence. And isn't this also the law? We are beautiful in 30-minute intervals. We balloon, bears sing cabaret. One New Year's Eve, I sat in a trailer park playground alone on the swing set, howling, still howling, still howling, howling. The goodbye moon, her giant face, offended that I wrote the tide right over, that I colored in the big boat, where Austin was one hiccup away from drowning, nearly thrown over by the gale of his pride, which beamed loud and southern and 15, not unlike the moon. I was one belt loop leaning in, faster than that body, asking not to let up. And isn't this kin to joy? Blue, heat, holiday, creation. Late night guttered in the storyboard, the sparrow on a library roof whose skeleton bleached all spring. Tar street, riddled with parts the oleanders bloomed, a bloated thought bubble spilling over like milk, an automatopoeia. To know me well enough is to know that there are times I cannot speak in complete sentences. So the tent was filled with boy children praying. So the ladybird wings in my dreams slept in small piles until I hit the bigger light and God hit the biggest light, and they all flit to life, beating. And my final poem will be, it's a love poem. I know that centrifugal force, blooming in wind and ink and napkins, frizz and garlic salt. The jokes about me have a thimble of truth. I did see God at the height of all four seasons, shimmering like fine craft glitter on the other side of a chain link fence. Surely I wasn't the only one. The boys of my youth taught me to climb and hop in case we had to outrun the cops into a freedom that had no end. I'm trying to tell you, it may be an exaggeration to claim that I have never been in love like this, but I am painting a coastline, a silhouette like its contours are the neck of my hometown, and I am closing in from the waters, swimming. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Alexus. Next, we'd like to spend a little time listening to Shaun. Shaun Griffin, poet, friend of the store, personal friend, and a very important person in the arts and people of our community. In the last month, Shaun Griffin caught two, so he says, 5-pound Lahontan cutthroat trout at Pyramid, stood at the foot of the Great Sphinx in Giza, and loved his mother to the other side of her brilliant 92nd year on this earth. When the pandemic came, he started painting the first of 20 watercolors on the US-Mexican border, where people squeeze through a knothole to live without fear. The border series paintings and poems opened in Las Vegas in December. Nearly 70, he continues to write and paint as if for the first time, because if anything can save us, it is art, even as the winds blow hard to move us down. He hopes to return to the prison and teach his poetry workshop now that COVID is losing its way. And one of his proteges, Ismail Sintilanis, will receive his MFA from Antioch this June. Glory be, the words tumble out to reach for us all. It is my pleasure and honor to introduce for the 23rd year, Shaun Griffin.
Thank you, my friend, and thank you everybody out there in the etherland. Big shout out to Alexus dialing in from London. Wow, what a great thing that is. Emily for hosting us, and Christine for making this possible. Yeah, 23 years, that's a long time. Who would have thought when we started this so naively so long ago. As Christine mentioned, I've been out of the country recently, and back, and so I'm acutely aware that things are fragile all over the globe. We were close to the conflict, and so because it's such a fragile time on this globe, I want to start and close with a prayer from Joy Harjo. So to begin, I'm going to read a brief prayer from Joy. This is from her book, Crazy Brave. East. East is the direction of beginnings. It is sunrise. When beloved sun rises, it is an entrance, a door to fresh knowledge. Breathe the light in. Call upon the assistance you need for the day. Give thanks. East is how the plants, animals, and other beings orient themselves for beginnings, to open and blossom. The spirit of the day emerges from the sunrise point. East is also the direction of Oklahoma, where I was born, the direction of the Creek Nation. So I just think it's really important to listen to that voice as we try to find a way back into this world that seems so torn apart right now. I'm going to close with another beautiful prayer from her. So one of the places we were was the former Constantinople, which is Kavafi's home. And he's the Greek modern master, as you know, and his parents are Greek. He was born there. And this was just such a beautiful homage to young writers and to trying to write poetry in the face of all the things that yell out to keep you from doing that. It's entitled The First Step. Excuse me. There's a few references to early Greek characters. Don't worry about them. The first step. The young poet Eumenes complained one day to Theocritus, "I've been writing for 2 years now and have done only one idyll. It is my only finished work. Alas, it is steep. I see it. The stairway of poetry is so steep. And from the first step where I now stand, poor me, I shall never ascend." These words, Theocritus said, are unbecoming and blasphemous. And if you are on the first step, you ought to be proud and pleased. Coming as far as this is not little. What you have achieved is great glory. For even this first step is far from the distant common herd. To set your foot upon this step, you must rightfully be a citizen of the cities of ideas. And in that city, it is hard and rare to be naturalized. In her marketplace, you find lawmakers whom no adventurer can dupe. Coming as far as this is not little. What you have achieved is great glory. And I just think that's a wonderful reminder to not let go of the joy that's in the middle of this process called making art. So when we left for Egypt and Turkey, we knew that Putin was threatening to come into Ukraine, but we were standing on the Nile, literally on a boat when he entered the Ukraine. And then when we got home, I was trying to find a way, like all of us, to understand what had happened. It seemed so meaningless and so purposeless. And I was taken by the fact that we were still here, we were still trying to make words, we were still trying to have value, despite what was going on abroad. Egypt, 6 days on. 6 days since touching down, the borders fade in contrails, and still the donkey, the egret, the languishing river remain. I try to release the faces, but they will not go. Yassir, Mubarak, these men who leapt at our door, and the smoke from the charcoal kilns, the sugarcane stalks, the bitter sweep of dust in the face, the tourist bus waddling the potholes of the temple. So we might see who was Pharaoh, who was slave, and they almost assuage these frescoes of how it was, the paint from the crushed malachite, ochre and egg white, and beyond the barrier of comfort, another border pressing down. These many lives peel away as the new king descends and the furious survival begins. We try to pretend it is not real, try to imagine coming home to silence or buildings unshuttered like the extant tombs. But there is no tourist guide, no secret to reveal. We are kept from the corners of the earth where the pain protrudes. How unlike a beautiful war to complain, but it does, and the throats of upheaval, no disguise, they are on their own. So that was trying to come back to the, to the menagerie that we have now. Christine mentioned the Border series. So about 20 years, or excuse me, about 2 years ago, I started working on these poems and paintings. And this is one of the poems from that series. It's entitled Beneath the Laurel of Immigrant Ashes. Just before COVID, my wife and I went down to work at the border as volunteers, and we couldn't find a way to put that experience to rest after it was over. And that's what, began this sort of journey into trying to express what was going on. And so there's a series of several watercolors and poems about it. Beneath the Laurel of Immigrant Ashes. What began as sorrow can only be shame, the winnowing of children from their frames. Like they are paper blown from a field, a silhouette of something wanted, an aura of an eye that might have belonged to a family. But the wind cannot abide this dissection, the crust of children whose river has swallowed this afterbirth of supplication. What became of the road north, the coyote, the peso, the cross, how nothing is concealed from its stare, this dominion of mercurial soldados, who bequests this trance of small towns to the pharaoh kingdom, and the children look on from the distance of black and white photos, this noose set upon the color brown. So I'm going to start reading now from the new book, which is only the third time I've read from this book because of COVID. It came out just before COVID, which was one of those strange experiences where you publish a book to silence, but that's the way love is. My friends that also did this at this time was just, they were, just have to jump into the silence and let it go, release the art wherever it lands. When we got home from Egypt, I got a call from my sister saying my mother was in failing health. And so this is a poem to her and to her beautiful life. Mother, I watched you burn the light of 6 lives, dancer, painter, Percival's sister, in an armchair at 87 as we moved you to an elder home. After 32 years of teaching, you swung the blackboard to greet us. There was no chalk to write your name. The vowels on the board fell to dust. And even though they wanted to erase the powder, you waited for the next door to open, to enter with your Gauguin in the rose garden. I remember a mother strong, old gold cigarette, martini and bridge. Remember the screen door slamming to work, where the farm worker kids thought you mother too. And my father, alone in his Irish lair, could not breach the day without you. At El Adobe, we ate below the black and white still of the brittle Nixons, their red leather chairs almost surreal above the former Capistrano jail. This is how we lift the dust, how we push ourselves away. As we leave, you dance in the waning sun of your window, of the roses that remain, vigilant, hybrid, storytellers who blush in the flourish of day's end. I know it couldn't be, the desert couldn't be more unlike London, Alexus, but this is a desert poem. We so rarely get rain here that when we do, things turn green and suddenly things change and you feel like you're living in Oregon for about 10 minutes. And this happens once every decade. So this is a poem to having a little moisture in our lives. Monument of what is not seen. The desert is wet, the air scented with moisture's frail cloth. A tumbleweed mocks thirst, and for the first time in months, the alkaline lake bed paddles to life. There's a bone of man below its white horizon. Every song before another man came to this place murmurs beneath. They The days stalk the rib cage of the deceased like two crows in the salt brush. Some torment of desire wakes to cloud sun and make-believe spring this late July. That it happens once every decade is immaterial. For now, the desert is a prayer of flight. In the distance, smoke clears to announce, this is the itinerant home of water. Breathe in, swallow, turn your feet to its cave, come down to the insurrection. This next poem is the title poem from this book. The book is entitled The Monastery of Stars. So my younger boy was hiking the John Muir Trail, and he needed Dad to be his mule and bring in cookies and a flask of brandy so that he could make the rest of the journey. So that's where the poem begins. Muir Trail Ranch in the shadow of Mount Shin. Crossing Paiute Creek to the hot springs, 2 deer in the meadow, our feet cold in the stones of rushing water. My son, his oldest and first friend, sink to their waists in the hot mud. The reeds tease us to dreamfulness. I think of those before, the man for whom this place was named, and the ghosts of those who age in stone, the rucksack, the burn of nightfall mosquito on the trailhead of yellow bricks. A blue Venus crawls over 2 conical peaks. There is no wind to send the mind to sleep. At dawn, pine needles float in the coffee and the moon steps away. Halfway to 10, I set off for the Florence Lake Ferry. The boys scavenge my pack and I empty the flask, a cairn on the granite below. I track their boot prints in the dust. 8 days to ascend the back of Whitney before work rubs time extinct. This trail I nearly died on before they were born. A river of snow that becomes the trout in their hands, and somewhere a fire skips into the monastery of stars. I remember last week, Izzy saying it was so funny giving a reading to silence. You can't hear anything when you're reading. So I'm imagining that someone is out there. I know the 4 of you are. Some years ago, my dear friend Bill Cooey left us, and he was a fine poet from this region, but he spent the last 3 years of his life living in a nursing home. And I used to go down there quite often to visit him and see him. The people that worked there liked him so much, they let him keep a rabbit in the room, which was completely, out of this, unheard of. And the rabbit just ran around on his bed all day and had a ball. I spent a lot of time with Bill. Ode to Love in the nursing home. All night, the ambulatory faces tripped to their rooms. Love did not speak in that place. Love laid down in the dining room, looked for the automatic door, became the thorn of disbelief. We ate a burger, potatoes, and warm salad, tried to swallow what was not said, the presence of a person outside, someone who needed you, the last premonition coming to visit before the surrender to stones. And that was, again, from my dear friend, Bill Cooey, our dear friend. A few years ago, the State Arts Council turned 50, which is kind of hard to believe in this new place, but it did, and they asked me to write a poem to celebrate that moment. And there's a lot of images of the desert in this poem too. It's in 2 parts. 1. In the slow autumn of a life, rain clouds halting too, little remains save the ancestors' artifacts. a mystery of misgiving must not portend. Last night, after weeks of trying, the sky opened to an image of the Stone Mother, whose extant beauty intoxicates. But how does its luscious color explain? A reluctant gift turns again to remind, art requires no answer. In this dry land, rain reconciles a past of extraction. For wind and others who need this place, it is sustenance for the ideal. Art's rudimentary hand in the petroglyphs is our hand, a remembrance of stone on this anniversary of creation, the runic elders who left their prints on us. So I spent a great deal of time working on a book about poet Hayden Carruth. And after it came out, I gave a reading in Johnson, Vermont, which was his Vermont home. And it was in an old church that was, 100 years old, and it was cold, and it was the middle of winter. But somehow his spirit came into the room. It was a great night. There's a fair amount of references to jazz in this poem because he's a jazz poet as well as many other kinds of poets, and so that's what I was trying to do here. The night Hayden Carruth listened in at the 1836 Opera House, Johnson, Vermont. When so many friends were in the room and his words echoed from the balcony of cold starlight, what each one said at the podium, Hayden, I loved you, man, from 3 men and a woman, and Hewitt ran in the lightning chorus of Johnny Spain's heifer to the roof beams, and Bud Bill summoned the wail of Beckett and Webster, but not before Beauty leapt from her cage in Wormser's hands. And over in the wooden chair, La Femme Carruth rose to pluck the late notes of brothers, when hippest Hayden sang for all of us. Well, it might have blown down in Johnson fog, the smoke of his voice to save a note of freedom and responsibility, a last riff for the poets who stomped the makeshift pews. Hayden, it was you up there, sweating and bringing the 4 walls close to the breath of need and hurt, when they dove into the inexpressible art of a man who would not go down without the ecstasy of peace, the great pain assuaged. The last line, the very last line, is his line. At some point, my wife and I were in Orlando, and a woman who was a Colombian journalist had taken up selling timeshares there. And we were both a little bit flummoxed because she told us about her Bohemian brother, who was a poet, still living in Colombia. And this was during the time when they were having their civil war. I think she'd fallen in love with them getting out. Ode to the Colombian journalist selling timeshares in Orlando. Periodista, your microphone is a wand to distract tourists from time saved in the Water Lily Hotel, where you dispatch news of the front to bromeliads loved by your brother, the Bohemian poet, who reaches from the kingdom of Coca, castled by soldiers, where no immigrant slips from view to report on the grave condition of falling to exile, and tourists funnel to the closer, sharp with his tie and grin like an exotic moth, who rinsed the canopy of ease that she may thrill to the replica of life before descent. Thank you. Thank you through the silence. So the book opens with a poem to one of my dear friends who's no longer with us, that was in the poetry workshop at the prison. And so I want to read this one to him. And because of COVID, I haven't been able to go out there except online like we are tonight, teaching. And it's been really strange to not be able to be there after having taught there for so many years. Because things still go on, whether or not you're actually able to come inside, they're still there, and it's still a tough place to be. Learning to polish razor wire, elegy for Bobby Gonzalez. You lie face up in the obituary like an owl with no room, no moon to wing by. The dirge of Alzheimer's finally slowed. For 20 years, you wrote poems in the workshop, small cryptic epigrams to the past, the scar laced throughout, and we listened, not knowing how to intercede, save their passage to the page. Bobby, you should never have died in prison. Granted immediate pardon, the pernicious suffered you into their arms, and now we imitate death's smirk. How could a state spin your life into 3 lines in the bottom of the local paper? Do not try to answer. You, replete with the chaplain's calm and the Vietnam vet ball cap. You who could not countenance grief on a yard where grief plays its sporadic opera. Do not, Bobby, say why the knife bloodied the hand. Say only you forgive the legal ruminations, the allegation of hope where none should persist, and choose instead to write poems to the God that would not lay down in this place. My daughter-in-law is Costa Rican, and we were in Costa Rica for her grandmother's 90th birthday. And because she lives in a small town, she knows the priest well, and the priest held a special mass for her on her 90th birthday, which was pretty wonderful. So this is a poem about women, matriarchs especially. She's the mother of 9 children who are also now have many, many more children. Mass in La Granita for Tita's 90th. If you believe a woman of 90 prays to a God women may know, and if the rain seeps beyond her pores to those who sweat the pews, her 8 children and theirs who rollick the humid sun, if the tumult that sweeps this land calms in the reading of scripture, then you will know her. Tumbler of thanks, a meter of grace on this Central American soil. What steals the tribe of women who belong to more than volcanoes and labor, this matriarch who depends on the wet upheaval. I said 9, I guess it's 8. So this is a love poem to my better half, who's put up with me for quite a while now. And it's who I was outside for banging nails for her greenhouse today. This takes place in Spain. I was there alone and waiting for her to come. She had not arrived yet. And I couldn't imagine staying there much longer without her. It takes place in Granada. Sleeping on the terraza without you. For 5 nights you have risen beneath the canvas and walked the tile fragments, your toes on the miniature paintings. And once you were a blackbird in the grape trellis, spitting the blood seeds into the white fan of daybreak. Each turn of sun almost insignificant, where sun has eaten from our lives for 2 summers. And the honeysuckle swallows the ribs of the guardrail without you. Woman who wears white and yellow like a vine and cannot imagine this morning without a crawl up the fence of home, miles and miles to the west, where blackbirds discovered land and brought grapes to the rooftop of two who cannot for long divide flesh and become its tutor. The night has breached, and we do not believe in the aberration of one apart from this place you last rested in the smoke and wind of every breath. So it's probably hard to visualize, particularly from so far away as London, but we live on a mountain that's been mined and mined and mined. So much extraction that we actually live on what's left now. I was reading Sunday in this town, Silver City, where there's a gaping hole now, just minutes from the town. And each time, because we've lived here so long, they come to town and they promise that things will be better and they'll fix it up when they leave and they'll fill the hole and nothing will go wrong. And each time they leave and the hole remains and we're kind of left with the rest of this things. So finally, I think you get to a place where you just have to let go of what's obvious, which is greed, and try to embrace what you can. Elegy for a mountain. They will not airbrush the mountain's flanks back to their original arboreal strength. They will not sing what the dust says when it blows over heads to the children below. There is no alchemy to retrieve the gold from its binary roots of profit and loss when the skin of a mountain is removed. This is an old story in the West. What steals from the consequence of lives in this community, broken by what has happened, and aching still to banish the footsteps of greed. All around, the trail of this mind carves its presence, and we, the itinerant ones, extract what is left when they leave. I was working as a poet in the schools in a town in Nevada, and I was there for the whole day. I was in a high school and a middle school combined, and we were having a great time. We were just reading poems. I took everything, old, new, young, everybody, and they were reading them and enjoying them. And I, big room of kids, and I thought things were going great. And they start to pass the poems around again to this next group that walks in, and there's a lot of sort of hemming and hawing, and I don't really know what's going on. And then it gets to this woman in the room who stammers, and I won't tell you anymore. Waiting to be chosen. Girl without words in the library, you sit with 5 students at the table. Choose a stanza from Uphill, Christina Rossetti's poem about the long walk from home. When I call on you, there is nothing to share. The empty vowels are dust in your mouth. You stammer, I can't read. Shoot the words through the stacks, like the mystery of flight from your absent father. Is there any mouth to recall what the poet would have said? Any servant to enter your eyes and claim a young woman? Not in this small town. It's nothing. I'm over it, you confide to the shelves. On the way out, the teacher whispers, the family's a mess, as if you disappeared from the room. Now you cannot trust the poem to be shared. You must pretend to understand. It is left without you. I've never been so embarrassed in that situation in my life. I've taught in dozens and dozens and dozens of schools and environments. And the teachers and the librarians, not one person said a word to me before I started to read with that woman. Kind of sad. So this is a poem about work and my love of birds, and particularly starlings, which I know among the bird community are fiercely hated and loathed because they breed like flies and they're everywhere and they eat all the things that we're supposed to be using. And nobody likes them, but I really like them. So anyways, here's a poem to work and starlings. Now that I have been stilled by the breath of starlings and the chime is moving to early wind, I can almost believe the day has begun. These hours spent on the porch to dig my heels into earth, wrinkle the nose in lavender after the long dissection of work. For mine is not a labor of hands, but of calloused arteries. Yesterday, in the unglowing office, my colleague upright before me to unravel the fear of thunders and failure touched our names like widows in their grief. The melancholy of making good has many coordinates, but I step between them to find my perch is missing. From who I was, exempt from understanding, pod carrier with a mortar of no wall but the fallen. This is how a dozen starlings become my windsock for the muffle of the human voice, a susurration of notes and something more. These many birds sing upon me. So I'm going to read you the very short poem, last poem from the book, and I'm going to close with a brief poem from Izzy Santillanes and then the prayer. Words. Would that any word wake America from its slumber, I would surrender all hope of writing another poem and join hands in its offering. So as Christine mentioned at the outset, my dear friend and former student of 23 and a half years is now about to get his MFA. And so this is a poem about reading the Belfast poet Kieran Carson when his wife fell asleep in his lap. It's a short prose poem. My wife fell asleep while I read Kieran Carson, her head sound on my lap. His words weighed in my palms, paging two worlds, each an imperative to flesh, attention. One I want to kiss, the other I want to talk with. Both I want to understand. World of sicarios, checkpoints, ranchos, city, punctuated by small arms, small world, small separation. Both countries more than 5,000 miles from my thighs to my hands, her head in San Joaquin, his heart in Belfast. And this is how wonderful that I can embrace the two. That's Ismael Santillanes. I'm going to close with a final prayer from Joy Harjo, hoping that we can, keep our beautiful world where it's supposed to be. When the sun leaves at dusk, it makes a doorway. We have access to ancestors, to eternity. Breathe out, ask for forgiveness. Let all hurts and failures go. Let them go. Thank you so much for everything. And thank you, Alexus, and Christine and Emily and everybody outside.
Thank you both so very, very much. Thank you, the poets, this whole year, this whole month. and all the poets that have graced us with their art and shared their talents with us over these past 23 years. It has been an honor for Sundance to do this and to do this with Shaun and Alexus. It's a delight to have included you this year. Thank you all.